By the time the handcuffs locked around the older black man's wrists, Officer Gavin Rourke believed he had already won. The deserted highway, the blazing Texas sun, and the faded shirt on the driver's back had convinced him that no one important was watching. He ignored the silver military identification resting inside the man's wallet. He ignored his partner's warning. Then he shoved the calm driver against the hood and sneered that people like him always believed they were above the law. Rourke had no idea that the man he had just chained to his cruiser was General Desmond Whitaker, a four-star commander responsible for tens of thousands of soldiers. He also had no idea that Fort Halcyon was only minutes away, that the general's emergency signal had already reached the command center, and that an armed military response team was racing toward the highway. The officer thought he was teaching a helpless stranger a lesson. Instead, he had just summoned the full weight of the United States government. General Desmond Whitaker did not look like a man who carried responsibility for an entire military installation. At 58, gray had begun to show at his temples, though his hair remained cropped in the same disciplined style he had worn since his first days as a young cadet. Without his decorated, formal uniform, the polished stars and the staff officers moving around him, Desmond looked like any other older man enjoying a rare afternoon away from work. He wore a faded navy shirt stretched across his broad chest, comfortable denim jeans, and worn leather boots marked by years of travel. The summer heat pressed down on the Texas asphalt. Waves of hot air shimmered above State Highway 89, bending the distant horizon and making the yellow dividing lines appear to move. Desmond was driving a restored Chevrolet Silverado. The truck was painted a deep burgundy and maintained with almost obsessive care. He had owned it for decades and rebuilt much of it with his own hands in the private garage behind the commanding officer's residence at Fort Halcyon. He loved the Silverado because it was simple. It did not carry encrypted communication equipment in the dashboard. It did not require a classified briefing before every trip. It did not remind him of military budgets, international tensions, personnel decisions, or the thousands of lives affected by every order carrying his signature. For a little while, Desmond was off duty. I was driving toward the nearby civilian town of Cedar Hollow to collect a specialized carburetor component from a local auto shop. He could easily have sent an aide, but he wanted to make the trip himself. He valued moments like this: the open road, the low rumble of the truck, the freedom to think without a staff officer waiting for an answer. Several miles behind him, an Oak Creek Police Department cruiser sat partly hidden beside the crumbling wall of an abandoned gas station. Officer Gavin Rourke was behind the wheel. Rourke was young, ambitious, and deeply convinced that the world had failed to recognize his importance. He had been serving with the department for less than 2 years after leaving the State Trooper Academy, under circumstances he rarely discussed. His instructors had officially described the problem as an inability to de-escalate tense situations. Rourke privately believed they had been intimidated by his toughness. He told anyone willing to listen that the academy had rejected him because he was not afraid to take action. Beside him sat Officer Dean Holbrook, a veteran whose retirement was close enough to feel real. Dean had spent 2 decades wearing a badge. He had seen brave officers, dishonest officers, frightened officers, and exhausted officers who stopped caring long before they stopped collecting a paycheck. That afternoon, he was leaning back in the passenger seat with a cup of cooling gas station coffee resting in the console. "Nothing is happening out here," Rourke muttered as his fingers tapped against the steering wheel. He disliked slow shifts. He wanted an arrest, preferably one dramatic enough to place his name in the local newspaper. He still imagined proving that the State Academy had made a terrible mistake by dismissing him. "It is too hot for anyone to be driving unless they have a reason," Dean replied without opening his eyes. "Enjoy the quiet." The burgundy Silverado rolled past their position. Desmond was traveling at exactly the posted speed. His seatbelt was fastened, both hands rested on the wheel, and the truck remained centered in its lane. Rourke sat upright. "Look at that." Dean opened one eye. "It is an old Chevrolet. What about it?" The windows looked dark. "They came that way on that model," Dean said. Rourke shifted the cruiser into drive. "Leave it alone, Gavin. He is not doing anything." Rourke pulled onto the highway. "He slowed when he saw us," he said. "That is suspicious. And look at that paint. Someone spent serious money restoring that truck. The driver does not look like the kind of man who could afford it." "You cannot even see what he is wearing from here," Dean said. The veteran already knew the conversation was pointless. Once Rourke chose a target, disagreement only made him more determined to prove his instincts were right. Desmond noticed the cruiser approaching rapidly in his rearview mirror. He did not speed up or tense behind the wheel. Decades of military service had trained his body to remain calm while his mind assessed danger. He had negotiated with armed leaders in unstable regions and commanded operations involving several nations. A small-town patrol car moving too close behind him was not enough to disturb his breathing. The cruiser's lights suddenly came alive. Red and blue flashes cut through the bright afternoon. A short burst from the siren broke across the empty highway. Desmond checked his mirrors, activated his right turn signal, and guided the Silverado onto the dusty shoulder. He moved far enough from traffic to give the officers a safe approach, placed the truck in park, turned off the engine, and lowered the driver's window. Then he placed both hands clearly on the steering wheel. Inside the cruiser, Rourke stopped hard and reached for the door. "I'm going to run him. Just be respectful," Dean said. "We do not need another complaint reaching the chief." Rourke ignored him. He stepped from the cooled cruiser into the punishing heat and rested one hand heavily on his service weapon. His approach was slow and deliberate, designed to make the driver watch him coming. Near the rear light, Rourke pressed his thumb against the glass. He had seen officers do something similar in movies and believed it made him look experienced. Desmond turned his head slightly as Rourke reached the open window. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" Rourke leaned against the doorframe and invaded the driver's space. His eyes moved over Desmond's dark skin, faded shirt, jeans, and worn boots. He saw no suit, no expensive watch, and no visible sign of status. The assumptions formed before he asked a single question. "License, registration, and insurance," Rourke demanded. "Certainly. My wallet is in my back right pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment. I will reach for the wallet first. Is that acceptable?" Desmond's voice was a deep, controlled baritone. People usually became attentive when he spoke, even before they knew his rank. Rourke heard only confidence, and confidence from this driver felt like disrespect. "Just get the documents. Move slowly." Desmond reached behind him and removed a worn leather wallet. He took out his Texas driver's license. Behind it, partly covered by another card, was a white and silver Department of Defense common access credential. It identified him as a general and commanding officer of Fort Halcyon. Desmond handed over only the civilian license. Rourke snatched it from his fingers and examined it. "Desmond Whitaker," he read. "Whose truck is this, Desmond?" The deliberate use of the general's first name was meant to establish dominance. Desmond's posture changed almost imperceptibly. "The vehicle belongs to me. The registration inside the glove compartment will confirm that. How does someone like you afford a restoration like this?" Rourke's mouth twisted into a smile. "This kind of work costs real money. Are you moving something you should not be moving?" Desmond studied the young officer. He had commanded thousands of young men and women. He knew confidence, courage, insecurity, fear, and the dangerous kind of pride that tried to disguise weakness as aggression. "I purchased this truck many years ago, officer. I restored it myself. You stopped me, and I would like to know what traffic violation I committed." Rourke did not like the calm question. He did not like being examined by a man he had already decided should be intimidated. "I will tell you when I'm ready. Get the registration and keep your hands where I can see them." Desmond slowly opened the glove compartment, removed the folded registration, and passed it through the window. Rourke took it and stepped away. "Sit still. Do not start the engine." As Rourke returned to the cruiser, Desmond released a slow breath. Beneath the edge of his sleeve was a tactical watch connected directly to Fort Halcyon's command system. He did not activate it. He still wanted to believe that proper procedure would bring the encounter to a quiet end. Inside the cruiser, Rourke dropped the license and registration onto the center console. "What is the violation?" Dean asked. "Speeding. A damaged light. He has an attitude. An attitude is not a crime." Dean rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Run the information. Give him a warning for whatever reason you used, and let us go." "I am not letting him leave that easily," Rourke said. "He is hiding something. A man dressed like that does not drive a truck like this unless illegal money is involved. I know the type." Dean turned toward him. "Listen to yourself. The driver is old enough to be your father. Run the registration." Rourke entered the plate number. The system paused longer than expected. Then a red warning appeared across the mobile terminal. Restricted. Department of Defense. Contact Federal Dispatch for verification. Rourke frowned. The system is broken. Dean leaned closer and felt his stomach tighten. That is not a system error. Those are protected federal records. The vehicle may belong to military command or a sensitive federal office. Give me the license. Rourke pushed his hand away. It could be a ghost plate. Criminal organizations copy federal registrations to avoid local systems. Gavin, stop, Dean said. The veteran's voice became firm for the first time. You return the documents, apologize for the delay, and release him. You do not challenge a Department of Defense restriction on the side of a highway. Rourke's face hardened. He had already decided that Desmond was suspicious. The restricted registration did not change that belief. It became proof that the driver was more dangerous than he first imagined. His partner's warning also felt like humiliation. I am securing the suspect. Rourke opened the door. Gavin, do not do this. The younger officer was already moving toward the Silverado. His hand had released the retention strap on his holster. Desmond watched him in the side mirror. The officer's shoulders were rigid, his steps were faster, and his hand remained dangerously close to the weapon. The general's mind moved instantly into tactical assessment. The officer was emotional, armed, and no longer responding to reason. Step out of the vehicle, Rourke ordered. Desmond looked at him. Officer, I strongly recommend that you verify my name through dispatch or allow me to show you my federal identification. I said step out of the vehicle. Rourke drew his conducted energy device and aimed the red targeting light at Desmond's chest. Unlock the door. Keep your hands visible. Move now or you will be shocked. Desmond's jaw tightened. He slowly reached for the door handle with his left hand while keeping his right hand on the steering wheel. I am complying. He pushed open the heavy door. An old injury in Desmond's left knee made the movement slower than it once had been. Metal fragments from an explosion during an overseas deployment had left the joint stiff. He turned carefully and placed both boots on the asphalt before trying to stand. Rourke interpreted the deliberate movement as defiance. Before Desmond was fully upright, the officer grabbed him by the shoulder and spun him violently. The general's chest struck the burgundy side of the truck. Pain flashed through his knee, but he refused to make a sound. Put your hands behind your back, Rourke shouted. You are making a catastrophic mistake, son, Desmond said. His voice was quiet, but the authority in it seemed to cool the air between them. Look inside my wallet. My federal identification is behind the driver's license. Be quiet. Rourke seized Desmond's right arm and pulled it behind his back with excessive force. He closed a steel handcuff around the wrist, yanked the other arm backward, and secured both restraints as tightly as possible. The metal bit into the skin almost immediately. Dean finally reached them. Gavin, what are you doing? Stop. He refused an order, Rourke said. He is driving a vehicle with false federal plates. I am taking him into custody. Desmond remained pressed against the truck. Humiliation moved through him, but it did not control his thinking. Rourke was beyond reason. Dean had recognized the danger, but lacked the will to physically intervene. Outside assistance was now necessary. With both hands behind his back, Desmond's fingers rested close to his tactical watch. He extended one finger, located the raised controls, and pressed the emergency sequence. The watch vibrated once against his wrist. A priority distress channel opened directly to Fort Halcyon's command center. Rourke gripped the chain between the handcuffs and pulled upward, trying to force Desmond to bend. I have you now, Desmond. Walk to the cruiser. The general remained upright. Years of physical conditioning made his body almost immovable. As Rourke pushed him forward, Desmond spoke clearly toward the hidden microphone. This is General Desmond Whitaker. I am being unlawfully detained and physically assaulted by an Oak Creek police officer on State Highway 89, south of the county line. The officer is armed and acting aggressively. I require immediate assistance. Rourke stopped and laughed. Who are you talking to? You think you are a general. You are just a criminal in an old shirt. Dean did not laugh. He looked at Desmond's posture, the total absence of fear, and the calm certainty of his words. Gavin, look inside the wallet now. They are fake credentials, Rourke said. Look inside the wallet, Dean shouted. The sudden authority startled his younger partner. Rourke removed Desmond's wallet and pulled out the driver's license. Behind it was the rigid Department of Defense card. The credential carried Desmond's photograph, the seal of the United States Army, embedded security chips, and multiple holographic markings. The printed information identified General Desmond Whitaker as commanding officer of Fort Halcyon. Rourke stared at it. The Texas heat seemed to vanish around him. His smirk disappeared. Color drained from his face as he looked from the credential to the man he had just shoved against the truck and placed in handcuffs. Desmond stood tall beneath the flashing lights. He did not look angry. He looked like a storm gathering beyond the horizon. "You did not truly believe I was talking to myself, did you, Officer Rourke?" Inside Fort Halcyon's fortified command center, the afternoon had been calm. Large digital maps covered the walls, displaying troop readiness, supply movements, training areas, and weather conditions. Officers and enlisted personnel worked beneath the steady hum of electronics and quiet communication. Captain Celine Mercer sat at the Central Operations desk. She was the general's senior aide, a brilliant officer whose loyalty to Desmond had grown from years of mentorship and shared responsibility. She was reviewing a logistics report when a sharp alarm cut through the room. Every screen around the central console flashed amber. "Commander Distress Override." The room fell silent. Celine dropped the report and activated the emergency channel. Wind rushed through the speakers. Highway traffic sounded in the background. Then the general's unmistakable voice filled the command center. "This is General Desmond Whitaker. I am being unlawfully detained and physically assaulted by an Oak Creek police officer on State Highway 89, south of the county line. The officer is armed and acting aggressively. I require immediate assistance." The command center exploded into controlled movement. Celine turned towards the communications section. "Locate the signal. Give me exact satellite coordinates." "Signal confirmed, Captain. He is several miles from the north gate." Celine activated the base-wide announcement system. "Attention all military police units. Quick reaction teams 1 and 2. This is Captain Mercer. The commanding general is under hostile duress in the civilian sector near State Highway 89. Immediate tactical deployment is authorized. Move now." Alarm sounded across the motor pool. Soldiers dropped tools, papers, and coffee cups. Military police officers ran toward armored vehicles. Engines roared to life as several protected vehicles and tactical carriers rolled from their positions. Sergeant First Class Ronan Pierce climbed into the lead vehicle and secured his standard military carbine. "Move," he ordered the driver. Back on the highway, the three men stood beneath a terrible silence. Rourke's breathing became fast and shallow. The military credential shook in his hand. "This is fake," he said, though there was no confidence left in the words. "You bought it somewhere." "Take off the handcuffs," Dean whispered. "Take them off now and hope he shows you mercy." "No." Rourke backed away from Desmond. "This is a trick. I am calling dispatch." He reached through the cruiser window and grabbed the radio microphone. "Dispatch, this is Unit 42. I need verification on a federal military identification." Static crackled. Then the dispatcher's voice answered, tense and breathless. "Unit 42, stop whatever you are doing. Do not proceed. Do not move the detainee." "Who contacted you?" Rourke demanded. "The Pentagon," the dispatcher shouted. "Federal Military Command says you have a 4-star general in custody. Release him immediately. They are warning that continued detention may be treated as the kidnapping of a federal officer." The microphone slipped from Rourke's hand and struck the side of the cruiser. He stared forward. The consequences were no longer limited to a complaint or department discipline. Assaulting a federal officer, unlawful detention of a military commander, possible kidnapping charges. Rourke reached for his handcuff keys. "Sir, there has been a misunderstanding. Let me remove these." Desmond stepped back. "Do not touch me." Rourke froze. "You placed these handcuffs on me because you decided I was a criminal. Leave them exactly as they are until proper authorities arrive." "Please, sir, I was wrong. I did not know." "Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Is that not what officers tell civilians?" Desmond's voice became colder. "You profiled me. You ignored clear information. You turned a peaceful encounter into physical force. You are a danger to the public, Officer Rourke. Your shift is over." A low vibration began moving through the highway. At first, it resembled distant thunder, yet the sky remained cloudless. Dean looked toward the northern horizon. A rising cloud of dust appeared beyond the crest of the road. Armored military vehicles emerged from the haze, traveling in a disciplined convoy. Their deep electronic horns vibrated through the air as they closed the distance. Rourke became motionless. The convoy did not simply pull onto the shoulder. It executed a coordinated containment maneuver. One armored vehicle crossed in front of the police cruiser. Another blocked the rear. Tactical carriers took positions along both sides, surrounding the local officers with military steel. Doors opened before the dust settled. Military police soldiers moved onto the highway and protective equipment. Their weapons were controlled, but aimed toward the two armed officers. "Hands in the air. Move to your knees," Sergeant Ronan Pierce ordered. Rourke made a broken sound and dropped immediately. His hands rose above his head. Dean lowered himself to the ground and placed his hands behind his head. Captain Celine Mercer stepped from the lead tactical vehicle. She moved past Rourke without looking at him and went directly to the general. Her eyes found the handcuffs, the dust on his shirt, and the marks already forming near his wrists. Then she slowly looked toward Rourke. "Sergeant Pierce," she said. "Yes, Captain. Secure the hostile officer, advise him of his federal rights, and recover the handcuff key." The idling military vehicles filled the road with a deep mechanical growl. Rourke knelt in the dust, his pressed uniform now dirty, his shoulders shaking beneath his raised arms. Ronan approached with calm efficiency. He secured his carbine and drew his sidearm. "Hands behind your back." Rourke obeyed instantly. Ronan removed the handcuff keys from the officer's belt while controlling him against the ground. Celine took the keys and returned to Desmond. Her usually steady hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the cuffs. The steel released. Desmond slowly brought his arms forward and rolled his shoulders. Deep red welts circled both wrists. Celine's jaw tightened. "General, are you injured? A medical team is waiting in the rear vehicle." "I am all right, Captain." Desmond rubbed his wrists and looked toward the officers. Dean remained on the ground without moving. "Bring Rourke to his feet," Desmond ordered. Ronan pulled the young officer upright by the back of his uniform. Rourke's legs barely supported him. "Sir, please, I made a mistake." "It was not a mistake," Desmond replied. The road became silent. A mistake is entering the wrong license plate. A mistake is misplacing a report. You consciously selected a citizen based on appearance, escalated a lawful encounter into physical violence, and rejected valid federal identification because it did not fit the story you had already created. You acted this way because you believed you were untouchable. Another siren approached from the direction of Cedar Hollow. An unmarked black Ford Explorer arrived near the military blockade. Its hidden lights flashed as it stopped. Chief Preston Danner stepped out. The police chief was a heavy man nearing retirement. A partly smoked cigar rested between his teeth as he moved toward the scene with his face flushed by panic and anger. He stared at the military vehicles, the armed soldiers, his officers under guard, and the 4-star commander standing near the burgundy Silverado. "What is happening here?" Danner shouted. "I am Chief Danner of the Oak Creek Police Department." "Who is commanding this unit?" 2 soldiers moved into his path. "Stand down," Desmond said. They immediately stepped aside. Danner approached the general and finally noticed the military jacket Celine had brought from the base. 4 silver stars were now visible near Desmond's collar. The cigar nearly fell from the chief's mouth. "General, I did not understand, but you cannot detain local police officers on a state highway. This is outside military jurisdiction." Captain Mercer stepped forward. "Chief Danner, your officer unlawfully detained and assaulted the commanding officer of Fort Halcyon. He ignored a valid Department of Defense credential and continued holding a federal official after verification was available. Federal authorities have been notified, and the scene is being preserved for a criminal investigation." "He did not know who the general was," Danner said. "He is a young officer. You cannot bring military forces into my town and take custody of local police." Desmond moved closer. "Chief Danner, your officer did not know I was a general because he refused to examine my identification. But he knew I was an older black man driving a civilian truck. He knew I was following his orders. He knew I posed no threat. He still chose force." Desmond's voice dropped. "If this is how he treats a compliant person on an open highway, what does he do to ordinary citizens when no one with authority is watching?" Sweat formed across Danner's forehead. "General, let me return him to the station. I will suspend him. I will open an internal review. If federal agents take him into custody, the press will descend on this town. Our department cannot survive that kind of attention." Desmond understood exactly what the chief feared. It was not the harm done to a citizen. It was the damage to the department's reputation, budget, and leadership. The opportunity for quiet internal discipline ended when he used force against me, Desmond said. He turned toward Ronan. Secure Officer Rourke inside the tactical transport vehicle. Take him to the Fort Halcyon Provost Marshal for temporary processing. Contact the Regional Federal Bureau of Investigation office and prepare an immediate transfer. You cannot do this, Rourke shouted as Ronan began moving him toward the vehicle. I am a police officer. You cannot put me in military custody. You are a police officer, Desmond replied without turning. Then the general looked toward Dean, who remained kneeling in the dirt. Stand up. Dean rose quickly and kept his head lowered. General, I tried to stop him. I told him to examine the credential. You tried, Desmond said, but you did not act. Dean looked up. You allowed another officer to assault a citizen because you were too exhausted, too comfortable, or too afraid to enforce the law against your own partner. Desmond's voice softened, though the disappointment remained. You are free to leave for now, Officer Holbrook, but you should spend the rest of this day deciding whether you still deserve to wear that badge. Desmond turned toward the lead military vehicle. Celine walked beside him. Arrange a flatbed for my truck. I do not want local officers handling it. It is already on the way, sir. The convoy began reversing its containment positions. Engines rose as the vehicles returned toward Fort Halcyon. Chief Danner remained beside his Explorer in the drifting dust. His department, reputation, and career were about to be examined by federal investigators, all because a young officer had allowed prejudice and ego to overrule evidence. The holding area, inside the Fort Halcyon Provost Marshal's office, was designed for dangerous military detainees, not comfort. Reinforced concrete walls surrounded a steel cot. The heavy door contained only a small window made from thick security glass. Gavin Rourke sat at the edge of the cot with his face buried in his hands. His duty belt, shoelaces, radio, and Oak Creek badge had been removed. He wore a standard federal holding uniform. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a cold emptiness in his stomach. I was no longer inside a familiar local station where officers knew his name. He was being held on a federal military installation, and the potential charges reached far beyond anything his police union could quietly resolve. Down the corridor, General Desmond Whitaker sat inside the warmly lit office of the Provost Marshal. He had changed from his faded shirt into his operational military uniform. 4 subdued stars rested across his chest. Across the desk sat Special Agent Conrad Vale of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Conrad was a careful investigator in a tailored gray suit. He turned through a thick personnel file. You rarely do anything halfway, General, he said. The local district attorney has contacted my office repeatedly, demanding that Rourke be returned to state custody. What did you tell him? I explained that assaulting and unlawfully detaining a 4-star federal commander creates a federal investigation. State authorities will have an opportunity to participate, but they do not control this case. Conrad closed one section of the file. When your distress call came through, I requested Rourke's complete background, not the cleaned version kept by the Oak Creek Police Department. I obtained the original Academy records. Desmond leaned forward. What did you find? Conrad slid the file across the desk. Rourke did not simply leave the State Trooper Academy because he struggled with de-escalation. He was dismissed after a simulated traffic stop in which he seriously injured another cadet playing the role of a non-compliant driver. The cadet was a minority. Rourke claimed he believed his life was in danger, even though the exercise involved controlled conditions and training equipment. Desmond read the report. Why was he not prosecuted? The Academy wanted to avoid public attention. They permitted a quiet dismissal instead of pursuing criminal charges. Conrad tapped another document. The Oak Creek Police Department hired him several months later. Chief Preston Danner knew about the training incident. The department needed officers, and Rourke agreed to accept a lower salary than candidates with clean records. Desmond closed the folder. The sound carried through the room. The incident on the highway was not an isolated failure. It was the predictable result of a department choosing budget convenience over public safety. I want to speak with him, Desmond said. I would advise against it, Conrad replied. He is now part of a federal investigation. Anything you say could complicate the prosecution. I'm not going there to collect evidence. Desmond stood. I'm going to look directly at the man who believed authority gave him permission to abuse another human being. The cell door unlocked a short while later. Rourke jumped to his feet and backed toward the wall. General Desmond Whitaker entered alone. He did not bring armed guards or attempt to appear threatening. He simply stood in the center of the room with the unmistakable presence of someone accustomed to command. "General, sir, Quiet." The words stopped Rourke immediately. Desmond studied him. He saw fear and regret. He also saw the weakness that had transformed insecurity into cruelty. "I have spent 35 years defending this country," Desmond began. "I have buried good men and women who died protecting the constitutional rights of its citizens. Those are the same rights you swore to uphold. You discarded them on the side of a highway because you believed the person in front of you had no power." Rourke stared at the floor. "You saw an older man in a faded shirt and a restored truck. You believed I was weak. You treated my patience as fear and my discipline as submission." "I am sorry," Rourke whispered. "I lost my temper. It will never happen again. Please let me return to my department." "Your department?" Desmond's voice became colder. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation has your academy file. We know about the cadet you injured. We know Chief Danner hid that information and hired you because you were inexpensive." Rourke looked up. The secret he believed had disappeared was now lying inside a federal investigator's file. "You used public authority to frighten people you believed could not fight back," Desmond said. "Today you selected the wrong target. But that is not the true tragedy. If I had been an ordinary civilian without a military credential, you might have damaged my life, and your chief might have helped make the truth disappear." Desmond turned toward the door. "What is going to happen to me?" Rourke asked. The desperation in his voice echoed inside the concrete room. "You will face federal prosecution for assault and deprivation of rights under color of law. The Federal Bureau of Investigation will examine the hiring and disciplinary practices of the Oak Creek Police Department. Chief Danner will answer for what he knew and what he concealed." Desmond looked back once. "You may go to federal prison, Officer Rourke. You will have time to understand that every part of this consequence began with a choice you made yourself." The steel door closed. Rourke remained alone inside the cell. Within days, Cedar Hollow was no longer an overlooked town on the Texas map. It had become the center of a coordinated federal investigation. A convoy of dark vehicles entered the Oak Creek Police Department parking lot before ordinary business began. Special Agent Conrad Vale walked through the front doors with a team of Federal Bureau of Investigation agents carrying federal warrants and empty evidence boxes. Chief Preston Danner was inside his office feeding personnel files into an industrial shredder. Conrad opened the door. The chief froze with a folder suspended above the spinning blades. "Step away from the shredder, Preston." Conrad's voice contained no warmth. "Unless you want destruction of evidence added to the obstruction charges you are already facing." Danner's hands shook as the folder fell to the floor. He lowered himself into his chair. The department he had controlled for years was collapsing around him. Federal agents secured the shredder. Computers, complaint files, personnel records, and digital systems. The investigation exposed far more than the assault on General Whitaker. Chief Danner had known about Rourke's academy violence. He had also suppressed more than 24 civilian complaints against the young officer during his brief time with the department. The complaints described excessive force, unlawful searches, intimidation, and racial profiling. Most had been locked inside a cabinet to prevent increased insurance costs and public criticism. The final evidence came from an unexpected source. Officer Dean Holbrook entered the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office and asked to speak with Conrad Vale. Dean did not request an attorney. He placed a personal notebook on the interview table. For years, he had recorded illegal ticket expectations, concealed use of force incidents, falsified reports, and questionable orders issued by Chief Danner. "I should have stopped, Rourke," Dean said. "I recognized the Department of Defense warning, and I understood what was happening. But I should have acted long before that truck ever appeared. I watched too many things happen because retirement was close, and speaking felt difficult. I am finished being a coward." Dean surrendered his badge and accepted early retirement. He also agreed to testify in the federal case. Rourke was transferred to a federal detention facility and denied release while the case moved forward. The arrogant smile he had worn on the highway disappeared. When his defense attorney visited, she brought no promise of an easy escape. Military investigators had released the complete audio from General Whitaker's tactical watch. It captured Rourke's threats, the false accusations, Desmond's warnings, and the sounds of the physical assault. The cruiser recordings and dispatch communications supported every part of the account. The case left little room for denial. Later, the Texas heat began to ease. The garage behind this commanding officer's residence at Fort Halcyon stood open. Inside, the restored Silverado gleamed beneath the lights. Its burgundy paint was flawless, and the engine ran with the smooth rhythm that came only from patient mechanical work. General Desmond Whitaker stood beside the open hood, wiping grease from his hands with an old cloth. Once again, he wore the faded navy shirt and jeans. Captain Celine Mercer approached carrying a sealed blue folder. "The truck sounds better than ever, sir. The carburetor only needed a little careful adjustment," Desmond said. He accepted the folder. "Is this the final report?" "Yes, General." Celine straightened. The district attorney accepted the plea agreements. Gavin Rourke pleaded guilty to deprivation of rights under color of law and assaulting a federal officer. He received 7 years in federal prison and is permanently barred from law enforcement or security work. Desmond reviewed the documents without expression. And Chief Danner, 5 years for obstruction and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The Oak Creek Police Department is now operating under a federal consent decree. State troopers are handling primary patrols while the department is rebuilt. Desmond closed the folder and placed it on the workbench. In the distance, the cadence of marching soldiers moved across the base. He had commanded armies and approved operations that changed entire regions. Yet the outcome in Cedar Hollow felt different. This victory was not about defeating a foreign enemy. It was about removing a danger from the society his soldiers had sworn to defend. Rourke believed power came from carrying a gun and wearing a badge, Desmond said. He leaned against the truck. He forgot that true authority comes from restraint and accountability. The moment someone believes the rules no longer apply to him, he stops being a protector and becomes the danger he was hired to prevent. Celine nodded. "You protected many people from him, sir. Had he stopped someone else that day?" "But he did not," Desmond said gently. He looked at his wrists. The bruises had faded, though the memory remained. "He stopped me. I would wear those handcuffs 100 times if doing so removed his power to place them on an innocent person." Desmond reached into the Silverado and switched off the engine. The garage became quiet, except for the gentle ticking of cooling metal. The 4-star general returned to the simple peace he had wanted before the traffic stop. The storm his emergency signal had summoned was over. What remained was a harder, more lasting kind of peace, one built through truth and accountability. The deepest lesson in this story is not that Gavin Rourke stopped the wrong man. Calling Desmond Whitaker the wrong man could suggest that the same treatment would have been acceptable if the driver had possessed less power, fewer connections, or no federal credential. There is no right person to profile, humiliate, assault, or detain without lawful cause. Desmond's rank made the response arrive quickly. His humanity was what should have protected him from the beginning. The law does not belong more fully to a 4-star general than it does to a mechanic, teacher, truck driver, warehouse worker, parent, or retiree. Every citizen deserves the same presumption of dignity. Rourke saw an older black man in a faded shirt, driving a carefully restored truck. Instead of asking an honest question, he created a story. The truck seemed too valuable. The driver's calm seemed too confident. The protected registration seemed too unusual. Every fact was bent until it supported the suspicion Rourke already wanted to believe. Prejudice often works that way. It does not always begin with openly hateful words. Sometimes it begins with an assumption made too quickly, then defended too proudly. Once Rourke decided Desmond must be guilty of something, every calm answer felt disrespectful. Every request for proper procedure felt like resistance. Even a legitimate military credential became evidence of another imagined crime. His judgment did not fail because information was unavailable. It failed because he refused to accept information that challenged his ego. The story also reminds us that authority is measured by restraint. Rourke believed being in control meant making another person feel small. He leaned into the window, used an insulting tone, placed his hand near a weapon, and tightened the handcuffs until they caused injury. None of those actions made him stronger. They revealed how deeply he depended on fear to feel important. Desmond possessed far greater authority. He could command tens of thousands of soldiers and activate resources Rourke could barely imagine. Yet he used that power carefully. He explained his movements. He offered verification. He warned the officer repeatedly. Even after military vehicles surrounded the highway, Desmond did not order revenge. He preserved the scene, requested federal involvement, and allowed the legal process to determine the outcome. Real strength does not need to humiliate. It protects, restrains itself, and remains accountable even when no one nearby has the power to demand it. Dean Holbrook's part in the story is quieter, but equally important. He recognized that the stop was wrong. He saw the federal warning. He told Rourke to stop, but he did not act strongly enough when action mattered most. Dean had years of experience and enough authority to challenge his younger partner. Exhaustion and fear of conflict kept him from doing more. Silence can feel harmless when someone else is committing the obvious wrong. Yet silence often becomes the space in which harm continues. Dean eventually chose truth. He surrendered his badge, gave investigators his records, and testified about years of concealed misconduct. That choice mattered. It did not erase the earlier moments when he looked away, but it prevented the department from hiding again. Responsibility does not require pretending we never failed. Sometimes it begins by admitting that we did. Chief Danner's choices show how institutions become dangerous. He knew Rourke had seriously injured another cadet. He hired him anyway because the department wanted a cheaper recruit. Then, when civilians complained, Danner protected the department's image and insurance costs, instead of protecting the public. One compromised hiring decision became repeated roadside harm. Each ignored complaint taught Rourke that consequences would never reach him. A leader does not have to personally commit every abusive act to share responsibility for the culture that permits it. Leadership means listening to warning signs, asking difficult questions, and choosing public safety even when the truth is embarrassing or expensive. Protecting an institution's reputation by hiding misconduct does not preserve trust. It destroys the possibility of trust. Accountability is not revenge. Desmond felt pain, humiliation, and anger. He could have used the military response to frighten or degrade Rourke. Instead, he demanded lawful processing and independent investigation. That discipline protected the integrity of the case. It also protected Desmond from becoming a reflection of the officer who had mistreated him. Consequences can be firm without becoming cruel. Rourke's prison sentence did not restore the afternoon Desmond lost. It did not erase the injuries or repair every life affected by earlier misconduct. But it removed a dangerous officer from authority and created an opportunity to rebuild the department. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, does not mean denying those consequences. It does not require a victim to pretend the harm was small or restore trust before trust has been earned. Forgiveness can simply mean refusing to allow another person's worst choice to control the rest of your life. Desmond returned to his truck, his duties, and his quiet moments in the garage. He did not allow Rourke's prejudice to define his future. He transformed the experience into protection for people he might never meet. That is a powerful form of grace. The story also asks us to think about the power each of us carries. Most people will never command a military base or wear a police badge. But every person holds influence somewhere. A parent has influence over a child. A supervisor can shape an employee's future. A teacher can strengthen or damage a student's confidence. A customer may hold power over a worker who cannot safely respond. Character becomes visible in the way we use that advantage. Do we listen before judging? Do we correct ourselves when new facts appear? Do we treat people with dignity even when they cannot reward us or punish us? Living kindly does not mean avoiding accountability or accepting mistreatment. Kindness can be calm, firm, and courageous. It can look like Dean finally telling the truth. It can look like Celine responding quickly without losing control. It can look like Desmond refusing to let anger replace law. Every choice creates consequences. Rourke could have returned the license, acknowledged the protected registration, and allowed Desmond to continue. He had many opportunities to step back. Pride made him defend one poor decision with another. That pattern appears in ordinary life as well. A misunderstanding becomes an argument because no one wants to admit being wrong. A careless comment becomes a damaged relationship because an apology feels too difficult. A small dishonest act becomes a larger problem because the truth seems more embarrassing with each passing day. Courage sometimes begins with a simple sentence, "I was wrong." Those words do not erase the past, but they can stop the damage from spreading. The road outside Cedar Hollow eventually became quiet again. The military vehicles returned to Fort Halcyon. Federal agents completed their work. State troopers replaced a department that had lost the public's trust. The burgundy Silverado returned to the general's garage, and its engine ran smoothly once more. But the most important repair was not mechanical. A dangerous officer lost the authority he had abused. A silent veteran chose honesty. A chief was forced to answer for protecting misconduct. A community was given the chance to rebuild public safety around service rather than fear. That is what meaningful justice can look like. It does not celebrate suffering. It recognizes harm, assigns responsibility, and works to prevent the same wrong from reaching someone else. The badge Rourke wore was only metal. Desmond's 4 stars were also only metal. Their true meaning came from the character of the men carrying them. One man used authority to make another person afraid. The other used greater authority to make future citizens safer. That difference is the heart of this story. There is another reason the ending matters. Desmond did not return to the garage believing every police officer was corrupt. He had seen too many honorable public servants to make that assumption. He understood that a uniform could be worn with courage, patience, and humility. The failure in Cedar Hollow was not the existence of law enforcement. It was the abandonment of the values that give law enforcement legitimacy. A good officer does not need a citizen to be frightened. A good officer can explain a stop, listen to an answer, and recognize when suspicion is unsupported. A good officer understands that calm questions are not attacks, and that compliance should reduce tension rather than invite greater force. The same uniform can represent safety or fear, depending on the choices of the person inside it. That is why training alone is never enough. Rules can explain what an officer is permitted to do, but character determines what that officer chooses to do when there is room for judgment. Cameras can record an encounter, but integrity determines whether another officer intervenes before the recording captures preventable harm. Oversight matters because people are human. Authority without review can become distorted, especially when a closed culture treats loyalty as more important than truth. The federal consent decree imposed on the Oak Creek Police Department was not simply a punishment. It was an acknowledgement that rebuilding required more than replacing Rourke and Danner. The department needed outside standards because its own standards had failed. State troopers could provide temporary patrols, but lasting change would depend on the next generation of officers entering Cedar Hollow. They would need to understand why the department had collapsed and why every complaint deserved careful review. A community cannot be ordered to trust. Trust grows when residents see respectful stops, accurate reports, honest investigations, and consequences that do not disappear behind closed doors. It grows when an officer's partner values a citizen's safety more than the comfort of remaining silent. Dean's notebook became important because it transformed years of private guilt into evidence, yet it also raises a difficult question. How much harm might have been prevented if he had spoken sooner? That question does not exist to condemn him forever. It exists to remind us that waiting has consequences. People often tell themselves they will act when the situation becomes serious enough. They will challenge the next lie, report the next abuse, or defend the next person being mistreated. But the next moment may arrive after someone has already been injured. Courage becomes most valuable before the outcome is certain. Dean could not change the past, but he could stop protecting it. By handing over the notebook, surrendering his badge, and agreeing to testify, he finally accepted that personal comfort was less important than the truth. Responsibility often begins when excuses end. Desmond's response also shows the difference between justice and humiliation. Rourke humiliated Desmond because humiliation made him feel powerful. Desmond never needed to return that treatment. He spoke firmly, preserved the evidence, and allowed lawful authorities to act. Even when he entered the holding cell, he did not threaten Rourke with private punishment. He told him what the process would bring. That distinction matters. Justice looks forward, as well as backward. It asks what consequences deserved, but it also asks what will protect the public and prevent repetition. Revenge seeks emotional satisfaction. Accountability seeks truth, safety, and repair. The 7-year sentence placed a clear boundary around Rourke's conduct. His permanent removal from law enforcement protected future drivers. The investigation into Chief Danner prevented the department from describing the assault as the work of one unpredictable rookie. The consequences reached the system that made Rourke's behavior possible. Still, no sentence can make every wound disappear. The handcuff marks faded from Desmond's wrists, but memory does not follow the same schedule as skin. He would remember the officer's hand on his shoulder, the metal against his body, and the instant when a peaceful drive became dangerous. Healing does not require pretending those memories are gone. It means learning to carry them without allowing them to destroy the peace that remains. Desmond's return to the Silverado was important for that reason. The truck represented freedom, simplicity, and a part of his identity untouched by military rank. Rourke had tried to turn it into evidence of criminality simply because he could not imagine the driver had earned it honestly. When Desmond repaired the carburetor and listened to the engine settle into a smooth rhythm, he reclaimed the quiet afternoon that prejudice had interrupted. He did not abandon the truck or allow the highway to become a permanent symbol of fear. He returned to what he loved. That choice is a reminder that wrongdoing should be answered, but it should not be allowed to own every part of the victim's future. A person can seek justice and still choose peace. A person can remember and still heal. A person can forgive without removing boundaries. And a person can live kindly without surrendering the right to be treated with dignity. There is also humility in Desmond's recognition that his rank changed the outcome. The military response arrived because the man in handcuffs had access to an emergency command system. Federal investigators moved immediately because he was a 4-star commander. An ordinary citizen might have waited much longer to be believed. Desmond understood that unfair difference. It is why he said he would accept the handcuffs again if doing so removed Rourke's authority over someone else. He did not view justice as something meant only for him. He used the power attached to his position to protect people without the same access. That is what responsible leadership should do. The purpose of influence is not to create special treatment for the powerful. It is to make fair treatment more available to everyone. The strongest leaders do not ask only how a decision affects people who resemble them. They ask who is missing from the room, whose complaint was ignored, and who will carry the cost if nothing changes. Desmond commanded soldiers because he understood responsibility. The highway encounter tested whether he would use that responsibility for personal anger or public protection. He chose protection. In everyday life, we face smaller versions of that same test. Someone may make a mistake that embarrasses us. Someone may speak unfairly, judge too quickly, or use a position to dismiss our concerns. We cannot always control what another person chooses. We can control whether we answer carelessness with carelessness, cruelty with cruelty, or dishonesty with another lie. Choosing restraint does not mean remaining silent. Desmond was not silent. He named the wrongdoing clearly. He demanded consequences. He refused to let the department manage the case privately. Restraint means remaining guided by values, even while confronting harm. That is often harder than anger. Anger can arrive instantly. Integrity must be chosen again and again. The people who protected Cedar Hollow in the end were not perfect people. Dean had remained silent too long. The academy had avoided accountability. Federal investigators arrived only after a general became the victim. Even the system that eventually worked had failed earlier. But imperfect people can still make honest choices that move a community toward something better. Progress does not require pretending the past was acceptable. It requires learning from it. The road, the truck, the badge, and the 4 silver stars all became symbols in the story. Yet none of them held moral power on their own. The road was simply asphalt until choices made it dangerous. The badge was simply metal until Rourke used it to intimidate. The stars were simply insignia until Desmond used the authority behind them with restraint. Objects do not create justice. People do. And justice survives only when ordinary decisions remain connected to human dignity. A respectful tone matters. A truthful report matters. A partner's intervention matters. A supervisor's willingness to investigate matters. Even a simple pause before making an assumption can matter. Rourke's life changed because he never paused. Desmond's discipline protected him because he did. The lesson is not that we must live suspiciously or expect every encounter to become a crisis. It is that we should remain aware of how quickly pride can narrow our judgment. Curiosity opens the mind. Humility allows new evidence to enter. Kindness reminds us that the person in front of us has a life we cannot see. Rourke saw a faded shirt and an old truck. He did not see decades of service, sacrifice, leadership, and quiet labor. We make similar mistakes whenever we reduce a person to clothing, income, age, race, accent, or occupation. No one should have to reveal an impressive title before being treated as fully human. That may be the warmest and most important truth Desmond carried away from the highway. Dignity is not earned through rank. It is something we owe one another from the beginning. If this powerful story of justice, courage, and accountability stayed with you, support the channel by liking the video and sharing it with someone who believes authority should always be guided by dignity and restraint. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more dramatic stories about hidden strength, difficult choices, and the moments when truth finally reaches the light. And leave a thoughtful comment. Do you believe the sentence given to Gavin Rourke was fair? Or should the consequences have been different? Until the next story, remember that real power is not proven by how much fear a person can create. It is revealed by how carefully that person protects others, how honestly that person accepts responsibility, and how kindly that person chooses to live when no one seems able to hold him accountable.